Let me tell you an old story. An old Cherokee man is sitting on a rock, and his grandson comes up to him and he says, I am so angry. I'm so angry and I don't know what to do. And the grandfather says, come sit next to me. Let me tell you a story. He says, I have two wolves inside of me, and they are battling. One wolf is dark. He's fear, anger, hatred, envy, resentment. The light wolf is joy, hope, compassion, kindness. These wolves are always battling for dominance. And the young boy says, well, which one will win? And the grandfather says, the one I feed. And I remember hearing this story and thinking that it was really profound, right? If we pay most attention, if we give the needed attention to the attributes that we see as worthy of encouraging, right? We want to be compassionate. We want to be generous. We want to be kind in the world and show up like that. And there is this sense in, I think, many of us that we feel afraid of some of the other emotions, the ones that are attributed with the dark wolf. Right? We're afraid of those emotions because they can make us feel out of control. Those fears and anxieties and hatred can really be a frightening emotional experience when you have them. And so feeding one over the other really sends you on one path or a different path. And that's really what the story is summing up, right? It's really speaking to this anxiety of people feeling, am I a good person? Am I a bad person? And it's speaking to it. It's based off of what your actions are, right? Because we all have this lightness and darkness within us. But here is the problem with the story. And there's more than one problem. The first is that this is not a true story, right? So originally, it's always told as a Cherokee tale, but it is a made-up story. It is still in the folklore realm because it is orally told. You probably heard it from someone telling you a story. But Billy Graham made it up in the 60s for a sermon. And he originally attributed it to the indigenous, of Canada, the Inuits of Canada. But the Canadian press were blasting him. They were saying, this is not a story from the Inuits. I don't know what you're talking about. And so when he had it published, he published it attributing it to the Cherokees because they had less sway in the U.S. media. And so he was able to get away with it without anyone really speaking up and having too much voice. And so that's the first thing. He attributed it to the Cherokee or any of the native tribes because we often like to hear stories that we see as older, that are from ancient wisdom. And he's romanticizing this idea of the Cherokee in this story as having gravitas because their culture is so old, and we see them as having a lot of wisdom that we were late in the game to really recognize as wisdom. So including that element gives the story a weight that he wouldn't have been able to have without it. Was it the right thing to do? No, absolutely not. We should not be doing this. We should not be creating fake lore and attributing it to someone who did not have this as part of their culture. And for one thing, a lot of the Native American tribes don't have this grappling with uh, dark and light as much as we do, because in their cultures there's a lot more nuance, there's a lot more gray and blurry lines, and there's also less of a um, anxieties and fears around those emotions that we have trapped in to these negative emotions. But when we actually, uh, instead of starving out that dark wolf, if we're going back to the story, if we, instead of starving out that dark wolf and just letting him atrophy and letting the light wolf dominate, if we acknowledge that dark wolf, if we acknowledge that resentment, the envy, the anger, if we pull on the threads to figure out why it is we are feeling these emotions can help us become more of a whole person. So instead of these two sides, good and evil, battling, they become intertwined and help one another grow, right? Anger doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to mean that you are a bad person if you're feeling the emotion of anger, right? Anger can help move us and motivate us, right? A lot of times when people go to protest, when the Boston Tea Party happened, people were angry, right? But it spurred a movement. And so that anger, in instances when you're not using your anger in violent forms, can be very useful. And so I think that there is value in this story. There is still absolutely value. We need to stop telling the story as if it's coming from people that it did not come from. So we need to tell the story truthfully, and we need to acknowledge that maybe there's another way to tell the story as well, to acknowledge that the emotions that sometimes feel scary and that we prefer to suppress and pretend aren't there can actually be utilized and woven together with other emotions so that we can become more of a whole person. So, what are your thoughts? Did you like the story when you first heard it? How do you feel about it now? Do you think it's a story that you'll continue to tell, that you'll continue to think about? Love to hear your thoughts. I'm Vanessa Y. Rogers, storyteller, author, and speaker. And until next time.